The investigation into Bruce McArthur is unprecedented.
We've never seen anything quite like this.
Unimaginable.
The bodies are from large planters.
Unrelenting.
I would say it's going to go into the years.
From small-town obscurity to big city infamy, the road is hardly obvious. Woodville, Ontario, is the quiet farming community where Bruce McArthur grew up. Where in the 1950s, he attended a one-room schoolhouse, now refurbished into a home. Ronald McEachern was in his workshop when he heard the news about his former classmate.
You grew up with the guy and it freaks you out.
Back then, McEachern says, Bruce McArthur was the kid who never got into trouble.
I just remember him being a tattletale to the teacher. That's all I can remember him. I just can't imagine him doing something like that because he wouldn't get into trouble at school with us when we were doing shit we weren't supposed to be. So,
police have spoken to McEachern and others from McArthur's past to trace the life trajectory of an accused serial killer. It continues here. In the 1960s, McArthur goes to high school in nearby Fenelon Falls. It's where he meets his future wife. Soon after they graduate in 1970, they leave the area. It's not clear where the McArthurs go, but by the mid-80s, they settle into a suburban home in Oshawa and raise a daughter and son.
All the stuff we have in the database coming in for the DNA.
Those decades are now under intense police scrutiny for the grim reason most serial killers begin killing when they're young. Detective Sergeant Hank Idsinga is in charge of the McArthur investigation.
We're looking at occurrences from the 1970s where he would have been in his mid-20s, mid to late 20s. You know, as a generality, you can say that people don't start this when they're in their 60s. We are definitely looking, yes.
The late 90s and early 2000s is when McArthur's past life as a suburban husband and father starts to unravel. McArthur declares bankruptcy. His marriage falls apart. Shortly after, he becomes a regular in Toronto's gay village and moves into an apartment in the city. A dark side emerges. In 2001, McArthur is charged with assault after attacking a man with an iron pipe. He turns himself in. At his sentencing hearing, 2 years later, the court hears he suffers from depression. McArthur tells the judge his life has been kind of a mess, not knowing what's going to happen and what happened to me. McArthur doesn't go to jail, but the conditions of his release include staying away from the gay village for 2 years. The judge's parting remarks now seem chilling. It sounds to me like you're a pretty good person, and it sounds to me like you're not going to be back here anyway. Of course, McArthur would be back in court, but only years after his first alleged victim went missing. Years after rumors started swirling that a serial killer was stalking the gay village. September 2010, the disappearances begin. First, Skanda Navaratnam, then Abdul Basir Faizi. 2 years later, Majid Kayhan. Police set up a task force, Project Houston, to find any links between the missing men. They find none, but McArthur is hiding in plain sight. He even gets questioned by police for an unrelated matter, reportedly an alleged assault. Meanwhile, the disappearances continue. In 2015, Saroush Mahmoudi is reported missing by his family. In April 2017, Salim Essin disappears. A couple of months later, so does Andrew Kinsman. Police create another task force, Project Prism. Again, it ends with no hard proof and no talk of a serial killer.
We're human beings. Of course, are we thinking, is that a possibility? Yes, it's a possibility. But it would be reckless of me to come out and say, perhaps there's a serial killer, unless I have evidence that there is a serial killer.
No evidence, but police are increasingly suspicious. And what they don't say publicly at this point is that Bruce McArthur is on their radar and has been under surveillance for the last 3 months. While police are watching him, they spot a man arriving to meet McArthur for a sexual encounter. Fearing for his safety, they move in and find the man in restraints. That's when, finally, police make an arrest, nearly 8 years after men started disappearing.
This morning at approximately 10:25 a.m., police arrested 66-year-old Bruce McArthur of the City of Toronto. He has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in relation to Mr. Kinsman and Mr. Essen. And we believe he is responsible for the deaths of other men who have yet to be identified. In other words, we believe there are other victims.
Police reveal McArthur had relations with both men. Detectives won't say how they linked McArthur to those murders, but they had already seized his van. McArthur had sold it to this auto parts dealer outside the city. Police also had a list of McArthur's landscaping clients and had some of those locations under surveillance, including this Toronto home that would become Ground Zero. Forensic teams also begin to scour McArthur's apartment and his digital footprint. Soon, they find more evidence. 11 days after his arrest, McArthur is charged with 3 more counts of first-degree murder. The total is now 5.
These new charges are in relation to the murders of Majid Kahan, Saroush Marmoudi, and Dean Lisselwick.
Most of the men McArthur is accused of killing are among the same men police had been looking for years before. Except one, Dean Lisselwick, a homeless man who was never even reported missing. Police now openly say what they had suspected for years and what had been feared all along.
It's a serial killer, alleged serial killer. He's taken some steps to cover his tracks.
But not well enough, and the details are horrific. Over the next week and a half, police find 6 sets of dismembered skeletal remains in the planters at a Toronto home where McArthur stored his landscaping tools. But at this point, the lead detective can only put a name to one of them.
We've identified some of the body parts as belonging to one of the victims whom we charged Mr. McArthur with the murder of, and that's Andrew Kinsman.
Meanwhile, a twisted portrait of McArthur begins to emerge. The mall Santa, the doting grandfather, the voracious thrill seeker who was on several dating apps, including ones geared to rough sex. Peter Scromo had known McArthur for years as a friend, but last spring after drinks, they shared an intimate encounter that suddenly became violent.
So we were kissing, and kissing turned into some petting. He undid my shirt, he undid his shirt. Then he grabbed me by the neck, and well, first by the head, and kind of pushed me down to his crotch. It wasn't quite there, and kind of popped back up, and then he really grabbed my neck, violently twisted it. I literally thought one more second he would have snapped and broken my neck, and I was a dead man.
Scromo managed to free himself, but after McArthur's arrest, more eerily similar and disturbing stories continue to surface. Jeffrey Davis knew one of the victims and has heard other survivor stories.
It was choking. My friend was being choked by Bruce.
Davis is a local designer who's lived in the community for years. 2 friends had frightening experiences with McArthur. Both have since spoken with police.
I think the part that was really killing our community the most was the unknowing and the apparent, well, it wasn't even apparent, it was the perceived lack of care from Toronto Police Services.
Amid the grief, that simmering resentment lingers. That police didn't take the disappearances seriously enough, that lives could have been spared. All while the horror continues to grow. Back at Ground Zero of the investigation, evidence is building. And with every police update, a gruesome rising tally of body parts and murder charges.
It's very disturbing.
A month after his arrest, police charged McArthur for a 6th murder for the death of Skanda Navaratnam. Police identify his remains, as well as the remains of another victim, Soroush Mahmoudi.
6 people in the planters. We've been through all of the planters that we have seized. We haven't found any other remains.
Words spoken too soon. Just 10 days later, police find a 7th set of remains in those same planters and take the extraordinary step of releasing a photo of a dead man.
I do not want to release this picture, and I'm doing so as a last resort.
They don't know who he is, but believe he is another victim.
How extraordinary is it for you to put a photo like this up at a news conference?
I've never done this, and I do it with great hesitation.
Sources tell CBC News the photo was just one in a cache of images of McArthur's alleged victims that he kept on his computer. Police hope to identify the man so they can lay another murder charge. Today, more charges.
Today, Mr. McArthur was brought back before the courts. He was charged with first-degree murder in relation to Mr. Fazey. Bruce McArthur is now charged with and alleged to have committed 7 murders.
Police also identify more of the remains. The tally now, 7 charges of first-degree murder, 1 set of unidentified remains, and the expectation there could be more.
Hey folks, if you enjoyed this video update from me, please give it a thumbs up. I appreciate the support, and if you have any comments to add, please put that into the comment section. I love hearing from you guys. Stay safe out there. Bye for now.